From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Betsy Peterson, and I'm the director of the American Folklife Center here at the Library of Congress. And on behalf of all the staff and the library, I want to welcome you. We're very excited about today's event and very excited to have you with us. And before we move along, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the American Folklife Center. For those of you who don't know that much about what we do, we are a center here in the library, in fact, in this very building. We were founded in 1976 by Congress with the mandate to preserve and present the rich diversity of American folklife. And we have strived hard for the last 41 years to do just that. Now, Congress selected the library itself as the site for the center, in part because the library already had a pretty significant archive of traditional music and culture, which had in fact been established in 1928. So it was already pretty darn big by the time we started, and it has only grown in magnitude in the last 40 years. We now have over 6 million items of recordings of traditional culture, traditional music, stories from over 140 countries throughout the world. And I want to invite you to come and listen to some of it. But the other reason that I think they selected the Library of Congress is because it's America's library, and it has a strong commitment to preserving the rich diversity of voices in the United States and indeed throughout the world. And I think this event today is very much about that commitment. So one of the ways in which we've continued to grow our archives in the last few decades is certainly through partnerships, and partnerships with other organizations, other individuals, and I think today's event is very much about that as well. And I do want to thank our partners for this event today, the Muslim-American Leadership Allilance. Thank you very much. And thank you very much to Zainab Khan. I don't know where Zainab, you're right there, right in front of me. And Naeem Uddin, I don't know if Naeem is here. Oh, welcome. I gather you came all the way from New Orleans, so welcome. And I also would like to acknowledge Mohammed Aziz, who I hope is here. I believe he is one of the board members. Okay. Welcome and thank you. I also want to acknowledge StoryCorps, who is one of the other very critical partners in this event today and in this project that Zainab is going to tell us a little bit more about. So once again, thank you to our staff. Thank you, Zainab. Thank you, Mala. And thank you, StoryCorps. And welcome once again.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for taking the time out and joining us this afternoon for what I hope is a very, very compelling program that each of you can understand how much heart and soul and effort was put into it. For the past 2.5 years, MALA, Muslim-American Leadership Allilance, has really, really worked hard to collect, archive, and preserve the stories of diverse Muslim Americans. And what I really noticed was that as a Muslim American myself, I felt that my voice didn't belong. I didn't know where my story would belong and where my voice would be accepted. And hence, a group of us had started the Muslim-American Leadership Allilance, and we're very proud to showcase the narratives and the collection of stories that we have today. Mala is a 501c3 civic and community organization, and we're committed to promote individual freedom, diversity, and to celebrate heritage. Our core storytelling program is to amplify voices of Muslim Americans. Really, when you think about it, Muslim Americans are the most broadest and diverse group in America, holding the broadest range of diversity across ethnicities, nationalities, various demographics in this country. These stories are a prime example of liberating new voices from behind a cloud of stereotypes. The stereotypes that have come from within the community, stereotypes that have come from the media, and actually providing people a platform to share their personal, individual experiences. To date, Mala has collected, archived, and preserved over 350 stories of Muslim Americans. And many of these stories were also archived into the Library of Congress, and really through our community partnership with StoryCorps, several were even aired on NPR programs. And as you listen to these stories, you'll hear just a small sample of what we've been able to produce that represents just the vast, diverse experiences that really make us human. These are stories of people that hail from Kazakhstan, Albania, Algeria, Siberia even, India, Iraq, Iran, Israel, Somalia, Mauritania, Mali, Nigeria, Morocco, France, pretty much every country, Palestine, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela. All of these people hail from these countries, yet have shared their story as Muslim Americans. And I really hope that these stories will continue to have an incredible potential to harness engagement and build bridges, all while stressing the importance of inclusion and individuality. I want to thank the American Folklife Center for providing us the opportunity to hold such a significant event. I want to thank StoryCorps for over 2.5 years of partnership as we continue to grow and record stories all throughout America. And I want to thank the Library of Congress also for providing us this incredible opportunity for generations to come back and listen to these stories and have pride in the personal experiences, whether they are triumphs, adversities, struggles, they are human journeys, and they ought to be recognized. We will now play a sample compilation of some of the stories that have been produced and even aired in partnership with StoryCorps and NPR.
I was born in Algeria. My parents were elementary school teachers from Syria who during the post-independence period in Algeria taught Arabic in Algeria. So I was born there and then we went back to Syria and I was raised in Syria, went to school there and to medical school in Damascus University. I graduated from Damascus University Medical School in 1988 and came right after that to Chicago. I was first in class in medical school, and I remember that I gave the graduation speech on behalf of the big class. We had about 550 people who graduated. And among the graduates at that time was someone whose name was Bashar al-Assad, who was the son of the president of Syria at that time, Hafiz al-Assad. Hafiz ruled Syria for 30 years, and at that time Bashar was not being groomed to be the next president. His older brother was Basil. Every Syrian dreams of the day that they will go back and try to rebuild what has been destroyed. Every Syrian American dreams of the time that they can go back and walk peacefully in the streets that they got to know and eat in the restaurants that provide Syrian cuisine and listen to the music of Syria. It looks like it's going to be a long way from now.
We
begin with me as a 4-year-old child who came from Pakistan. My father wanted a better life for us. He wanted us to go to school, and I came to America, and I remember being called Hindu and being called all these names because kids just didn't understand my culture. And I would be like embarrassed if my mother, who wore the headscarf, would take me to school. As a child, you don't know because all you want to do is fit in. And I remember I was in 4th grade and I had a crush on this Greek boy. His name was Leo something. It's a long last name. And I remember thinking to myself, why even look at him, Naila, when you know you're going to marry someone else? Imagine what that's like for someone in the 4th grade. So in October of 2004, I went to Pakistan. They said, oh, it's your cousin's wedding. You know, that was the trick to get me there, that we were going for my cousin's wedding. And then next thing you know, January 5th came along, and that's the day my whole life changed.
I think as a Muslim American, as an Arab American who has grown up in the United States his whole life, I was born and raised here from parents who immigrated from Syria. Now, I think one of the main reasons why I wanted to come down here and speak about my story is because I am one of the very few Arabs or Muslim Americans who decided to branch off from being a doctor or engineer or lawyer and do something completely out of the norm. And so right now I am a videographer. I've been doing video, telling stories for about 9 to 10 years now. I'm not in it for the money, and I'm not in it for the fame. I'm in it for the next generation that is to come. The next generation out there who are like my brother or my sister or even my kids. I want them to grow up knowing that they can be something that they want, that they can put their mind to. You can be a firefighter. You can be someone that wants to be on the news, someone that wants to do something in PR, communications. Anything that you can put your mind to, you should go for it.
My dad is Palestinian, and my mom is half Russian and half Iranian. It's interesting because my grandmother is actually Jewish, and my grandfather is Muslim. He's Shia Muslim. And so then my dad and his parents are Sunni Muslim. So in addition to the different cultural practices, there's also differences in religious sects. What I've realized as I've grown up is that kind of one culture and just religious sect kind of was more prominent in my life. So definitely the Palestinian culture and practices I've learned way more about than Iranian culture or even Russian culture. That's probably what I've learned the least about is Russian culture. And then I am a Sunni Muslim too. So yeah, I've just realized that I didn't really have the opportunity to learn as much as I would have liked to about Iranian culture, Russian culture, as well as Judaism and Shia Islam too.
I hope you enjoyed that little montage of a snippet of just a compilation of the rich stories that we've been able to collect and preserve. Now I am very excited to announce 3 of our panelists today who have also shared their story with Mala. And I want to thank them because they came from 3 different states. So from New York, we have Zabi Rahat. So please come on up. We also have Supna Zaidi from Washington, D.C. And finally, we have Ahmed Salim from Chicago, Illinois. So 3 different stories, 3 different journeys. Zabi, starting from you, could you share a little bit about just your journey here and also what compelled you to share your story with Mala?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. Before I start, I did my story with Mala, and I was very thrilled with what Mala is doing and all these stories and the diversity of American Muslims in America and also the communities they live in. I came to U.S., I was born in Kabul, Afghanistan, and spent my early teen years in Kabul. I was living there during the entire Taliban period. And then I moved to U.S. When I was in 11th grade through a State Department-funded exchange student program. And the way the exchange student program worked was that the students would be placed randomly across the U.S. Anywhere. And I was placed in Bern, Indiana, and I don't think you can even find Bern in a map. I came from Kabul. Kabul has a 5 million population. Bern had 5,000, the entire its town. My high school in Kabul had 10,000 students. Bern had 500. I don't think they had ever seen a brown person, let alone a person from Afghanistan. So it was an unbelievably amazing experience living with this family that took me in and became my legal guardians after that exchange student year ended. And Bern, Indiana is not like Washington, D.C. or New York City. It is a very conservative, majority white, I would say Republican town. So combine all those, you already have certain perception of what that community would look like. But to me, it was my family there. And the way they welcomed me and the way I became such a really important part of that community really changed my perception of what America, what small town America is all about. So one of the reasons I wanted to share my story was because of that family and friends I found in a part of America where you always hear about racism, you always hear about bigotry. But to me, I made friends with one of my friends' granddad, who I went to their house and played cornhole with. I don't know if you know what cornhole is. If you're from Mid-East US, you would know what cornhole is. And I drank moonshine with him. And I was underage, so let's forget about that. But he was a Vietnam veteran. So when I told him I was from Afghanistan, and he was like so welcoming, and then we sat, they had a whole barbecue. But that's what made me want to share my story is that a kid, like at 16, 15, when I was in undergrad, then I spent time in Ohio. Very young kid from Afghanistan in the middle of nowhere in America, making friends with the most unlikely people. And they welcomed me, all of them. I mean, of course, there's certain racism that you feel, but for the most part, it was an amazing experience and one of the reasons I wanted to share.
I think that's an incredible story, Zabi, and I think what you also mentioned is very important because dispelling stereotypes, I think your story in itself does that. It goes against the grievance narrative, and it actually shows that you were welcomed, you were able to create a new identity and an American identity, and you were welcomed, and you obviously as a human you experience certain things, but it's a success.
Yeah, and I think it may be a little different because I was a student. So I was in university living in a campus in a dorm room, and all freshman kids, this was a new experience for them. So everybody coming to living in a campus dorm room, they're all away from home. I was away from home, so all those kids were away from home. And we all had that one shared experience of being students in a small campus. That's, I would say that was an opportunity, an advantage for me to be able to make all these friends and with different communities.
That's great, yeah. Supna, you had also shared a very compelling story with Mala as a, Muslim-American with your heritage and your, very unique story of where you come from and your parents' story. So if you could share that with us, that would be wonderful.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming today. So the profile I wrote focused on, I guess, 2 stages of my life. Me through my parents and their experiences having left Pakistan in 1981 and the context in which they left, and then me growing up through the 80s and 90s and getting married about 4 years ago. And for me, I'll get into the details of those, but the one common thread that I realized in writing that, which was most compelling, especially in the context of for millennials, especially growing up post 9/11 and being any minority, not even just Muslim, is that there's always adversity. There's always experiences that we go through, regardless of whether it's economic adversity or something having to do with a disability or any kind of disadvantage that we experience that makes us in the moment feel like we're going through something worse than others. But in hindsight, when you look back, it's a learning experience. You grow from it. You're a better person through it. And the politics of today makes things feel more sensitive and worse, or makes us feel that we're in a situation that can't be overcome. But when you look at the experiences of everyone around you that precede more than one generation, like my parents coming to America, or anyone in this audience, whether it was their grandparents or great-great-grandparents that came to the U.S. from somewhere else, we've all been through, we as in our family histories, have been through periods where we had to figure out who we were, what our identity means to us, and how we can integrate it to all being American at the same time. And I think that's something that, for me, means everything now in our political environment when I look at my nephews and nieces who aren't even 10 yet, of what I'm going to share with them about what it means to grow up American and be Muslim or Pakistani or anything other hyphen that you want to put in there for yourself. And with my parents, they left Pakistan in 1981 as the country was being Islamized during the Cold War under the dictatorship of Prime Minister named Zia ul-Haq. My dad was a liberal who was part of Pakistan television. His dream was just to be like a filmmaker, write soap operas, like those dramas. And just, his friends were writers and musicians, and he was a very jovial person. And with the increasing religiosity that was coming into the public sphere of Pakistani society, piety became a factor of your employment. And because my dad didn't fit into the expectations of what the government and a certain increasingly orthodox society was expecting of him, he basically got demoted. I was born in a city called Karachi, which continues to be pretty cosmopolitan, like New York City. My dad was general manager of Pakistan television. He got demoted to Peshawar. No offense, but Peshawar was not exactly where you wanted to end up if you were in the television industry. And because my family didn't come from a wealthy background, we were lucky enough to be able to immigrate to the United States, where my father had a sister who had already settled here. My parents started over. My mother was a painter, and with my father's background in film, there was really no translatable successful career to start over again in the United States. They had a little apartment, and my parents' first jobs were fast food. And especially, I think, for a person like my father, that has to hurt personally in terms of who you think you are, what you've achieved in life, and where you're starting over at 40. I'm 40 now myself. My father's passed away. It's been 10 years, and I can look back at my childhood and look at all kinds of different experiences we had that were difficult, but I think I always just attributed it to being an immigrant, that first generation, understanding that people aren't gonna get certain things, and yeah, it sucks. Sometimes you don't have enough money to do the things your girlfriends are doing in 6th grade, and you're not gonna get to go to the slumber party because your parents don't understand the culture, and they're afraid of all kinds of bad things happening to you because they have a lot of time to make up a lot of stuff and watch 4 o'clock news. And they think that's all American society is. But, we fight, we push for boundaries, we learn and ask for more responsibilities to figure out our own space, and we figure out what all the labels that are being put on us actually mean to us. For myself, my family is Shia, which is a minority, religious minority in Pakistan, a Muslim minority even. So growing up in Southern California, I couldn't even just say I was Muslim, because among Muslims, I was a different thing. So I never really fit in anywhere. And it took me a long time to be okay with that. And all the friends I made by the time I was in college happened to be blunt, middle-class, white girls who grew up in conservative families like me. What we had in common were the simple joys in life. We were going to the movies at 10 o'clock at night, and our parents weren't there to get mad at us. It really had nothing to do with a specific religion. And our values were the same. we were studying, we were trying to go to law school or med school or whatever, and our friendships were based on our trust that we had in each other, the respect we had for each other, and just being girls. But the exposure we also had to each other's families allowed us to learn. My best friends were Catholic or Jewish or Hindu or Vietnamese and Buddhist, and they came to my house, and it was a Muslim household, and they were exposed to Pakistani food, South Asian clothing, Bollywood music on the radio if my dad was playing it, and it was an amalgam of experiences. It wasn't just being Muslim, because Muslim it has no one singular definition. And if you fast forward today, when I look at my nephew and niece who are 9 and 7, they're growing up in Indiana. They're, I think, the only Pakistani kids in their neighborhood. My husband's Catholic from Richmond, and their favorite visit to Virginia is for Christmas. And I love the fact that they have exposure to different faiths, and not different cultures, because they're 100% even more American than me. They were born here. And for them, they don't flinch. They easily move fluidly from wearing Pakistani clothes on Saturday because they're going to some baby's baptism, which we call akika, or then going to a Christmas party the following week because it's December 20-something, and it's the season. And to me, it's that fluidity that makes America great. It's that respect and balance that the public and the community has, irrespective of politics and irrespective of whatever particular moment we're in. That essence of being American is not going to go away in my mind. And it lets me be Pakistani, American, and 80 other things that I listed in my profile. And it's why I couldn't ever live anywhere else.
Thank you, Supna. It was very, very well said. Thank you. Ahmed, you have also had a very compelling journey in achieving the American dream, and I'd love for you to share a little bit about your own personal experience, what you shared with Mala.
I'm terrible with technology, and it continues. First of all, thank you. So, like everyone else, I am an immigrant. I'm from Pakistan. I actually immigrated here when I was 2, and my parents came. Same message, American dream. And, I thought it was important to talk about the American dream. I don't think we don't really give gratitude to the idea of the American dream. I'm now 33, and, my entire life I grew up saying, I immigrated and not really understanding what my parents gave up and, what they had to go through and what we went through really to assimilate. So I came here at 2, and my parents, changed careers. My dad was in the army back in Pakistan. My mom was a housewife. My dad opened up shop. He was hit hard with the recession like a lot of other people. He lost his house, or our house. He lost his business. I actually got into law school at the same time that happened. Not once did they flinch. Not once did they complain about being in this country. They figured a way to get me my loans. They figured a way to make sure that I was able to attend law school. I worked. I like to brag. We always hear parents say I had to walk 20 miles in snow to get to school. My 3rd year of law school, I went to school out in Michigan. I lived in Chicago. I scheduled all my classes for Thursday afternoon and Friday. So I used to drive up Thursday morning, sleep on my friend's couch Thursday night, and drive back Friday night to avoid paying rent. And I would just buy him dinner. And I would work at a sunglasses kiosk on the weekends and during the week. So about 40 hours a week. So I can't wait to tell my kids that story, because I legitimately am going to hold that over them. But that's the idea, right? That's the American dream. My parents, I saw that work ethic growing up, and I was able to replicate it. And that actually led me to my basically current professional life. I do compliance law for a health system in Chicago, and it led me to my current decision, which I won't go into detail here, but I decided to run for office. And running for office right now is basically like the pinnacle of an immigrant's dream, like seeing your child being able to run for office. And truth be told, after I decided to run for office, my dad, 67, was let go from his job because he, wasn't technical savvy enough to keep up with the computer systems at work. He didn't complain. What did he do? He literally the next day signed up to be a Lyft driver and drives Lyft as a 67-year-old. And that's what I mean when you talk about the American dream and really making sure that, we appreciate it, and we take it for granted for the idea that we hear it so often. But, there are people who believe in the American dream so much that stuff like that happens and they just keep rolling with it. And, they see their kids and I'll see my kids based on the fruits of my parents' labors. And, it's something I really think is important to share.
Thank you, Ahmed. That's actually something that I think resonates, quite frankly, with a lot of us sitting in this room, is especially coming as from a child as an immigrant, the sacrifices that people have made to ensure that your life here is what it is. I know myself, my own father escaped oppression and subjugation in its worst form from Afghanistan and came here and rebuilt his entire life and his identity here. And I know what he sacrificed and what he had gone through to ensure that myself and my sisters have the life that we have now. I'm going to open the floor to the audience for Q&A. Please take advantage of the panelists that we have here, and also any questions that you may have in regards to the storytelling process. You're more than welcome to go on our website, which is www.malanational.org. You can share your story, you can read the stories, you can listen to the stories, and the floor is open. And Thea is walking around with the microphone in case anybody has a question. None? Somebody has to have one question.
Hello, I'm also from Pakistan, so I can better relate with the two persons here, Supna and Ahmed. And as my project in Library of Congress also based on assimilation of Pakistani community in the United States. And I have one question from Supna. As you just mentioned that you were married to the Catholic, and how the Pakistani community and the families perceive such kind of marriages in which, there is a huge difference of the religion and the nationality and ethnicity, and there is a difference. So do you think that all families across the board accepts that? And if they don't, which communities do not accept it as such?
Thanks for your question. Well, interfaith marriages are a new experience for first-generation immigrants. I mean, every Pakistani family isn't first generation, but predominantly they are. And I think the insularity that maybe is where you're going, like with your question, is sometimes coming from a place from parents where they have fears of the unknown, and being immigrants that have migrated from one place to another, it's not that they are anti whatever the other is, but it's more a fear of preserving, whether it's language or culture. I remember when I was younger, my father would say, oh, if you marry out, how will I talk to him? And I'd be like, you speak English perfectly fine. But his point was his command of, his argument, his emotion, his heart, that would be in Urdu or Hindi. That wouldn't be in English. And so he's coming from an emotional place when he said that, And I can understand that. And I think that's probably why it took me a long time to get married, because I spent a lot of years trying to meet somebody that, and this is the thing about identity, right? Someone can fit on paper or on the outside, but that doesn't mean they fit you on the inside. Because I like everyone else here, our experiences are unique to us, and they're like in our heads, they're not external. And the funniest thing I can tell you about my husband is that on the outside, we couldn't be more different. Voted it opposite at the election, different religions, all kinds of different stuff. But, no one reminds me of my family more than him. Like his habits, like the way he says and does little things reminds me of my dad sometimes. His love of family. One of the most endearing things he ever did for me was when we were dating, because my mother had already been widowed. He didn't even tell me. He sent her a Valentine. My brothers are not going to do anything like that for anybody ever. And my husband did that. So personal relationships should be respected as such. And I think interfaith marriages are happening more and more slowly as families become more integrated in the United States. I think my age group had it the hardest, but when I look at people in their 20s, I'm amazed they're dating in college. We were not allowed to date in college. I mean, you wouldn't do that. People are meeting their spouses on their own. Arranged marriages are more becoming, from what I see, more in name rather than practice. I call it the mommy network. Parents are introducing their kids, but it's not like, oh, here's Bob, you're marrying him on Friday. That's a real arranged marriage. That's not happening. And then, in that same vein, people are looking for people who they get along with, and that is increasingly crossing labels, whether it's religion or nationality. And I think that's just, again, part of an immigrant experience and not necessarily unique to Muslims.
That was a great question and answer. We have another one.
So I actually wanted to join this conversation. My father is from Multan. He grew up in Delhi, which tells all of the Pakistanis in the room that my family isn't Muslim. He was born in 1940. And he came to the United States in the early 70s, where he met and married my white Unitarian mother. They got married in 1973, I think. And I think that you're really right when you say that it's different generationally, right? So I'm about your age, and I think it's probably very different for people dating now, but for my parents, even then, there were certainly people who made my mother welcome immediately in the community, and people in my mother's community who made my father welcome. I think the issue, a lot of it had to do with what were expectations for children. And so I think now, people who are raising kids, there's much more acceptance on the part of the parents, and the goal is that fluidity. Whereas I think that growing up, the child in one of those blended marriages in the 1980s, my sister and I, and our inability to speak Punjabi, for instance, was scary to parents who were immigrant parents, in a way that I suspect it's maybe sad sometimes for parents now, but it's not terrifying in the same way. And so I do think it's this sort of forward-moving progression, maybe towards something good, maybe just different, right?
Right.
But yeah, very much what you're saying, and I think I see something very different for friends of mine who marry across than I saw for my parents, even though I would say they found a lot of acceptance 50 years ago.
And I think it can be very empowering for Muslim communities, speaking broadly, because when you look at Americans of Muslim backgrounds growing up here, or even traditional backgrounds, I'd probably take a step back. It's not just Muslims. A lot of issues that come up in the Muslim context actually have to do with traditional patriarchal cultures, Middle Eastern cultures, not strictly Muslim, or Indian culture, South Asian culture. There's a lot of stuff, especially having to do with women's rights issues. Anyway, with that, my point is more that when people of my age group or younger grow up in Western cultures like American culture, and we integrate our heritage with being American, which also includes American values and American sensibilities, what I'm seeing when you look across media is you see more liberal understandings of what it means to be a woman or Muslim or Pakistani, and I think that goes back into the community. So a little girl being raised going to a mosque, today is probably going to hear a lot more enlightened interpretation of what it means to be Muslim or Pakistani or whatever other national background she might be of than maybe what my mother was exposed to, or even what I was exposed to coming to America, 1981.
I think for anybody in this room also that has a very compelling story, I do encourage you to go on the site and definitely share your story, because it is an open platform. You can submit your story, your headshot, and it would be amazing to feature you, especially your unique narrative as well. Are there any other questions from any place that I overlooked? Oh, I'm sorry, there you go.
Hi, I had a question for the last speaker. So I'm kind of wondering what exactly do you mean by the American dream? Because I don't know, it seems like the way you're describing it is kind of in terms of material successes. How do you think that kind of intersects with the way Muslims in this country have been criminalized and marginalized consistently, and perhaps especially under this administration?
Well, I'll start with that. I think the most important thing is that, it's the stories themselves are not just about material gain, but it's about the sacrifices and the opportunities that America has had provided for people that come from all walks of life, not just Pakistan, but, all different countries, and not just economic growth, but actual freedom and opportunities and democracy. And, there's a lot of Muslims that come from countries where there was a lot of injustices that also existed, where democracy doesn't exist. I think that's kind of where Ahmed was touching on that. Now, in regards to anything about politics or the current administration, that's not something that we comment on. Quite frankly, our organization and our whole project is to exemplify what Muslim American experiences are and how Muslims have contributed to this American fabric of society. So going back into that, Ahmed, you can answer that question as well.
Well, it restricts me just a bit, so we can always talk after in case you need to. But yeah, it's beyond material benefit and gain in the respect of the American dream. I think when I'm referring to the American dream in my parents' eyes, it's really just making sure that their children had the opportunity, specifically with education. And I think every single person on this panel and stories we've heard or stories I've seen on Mala, it seems to be the general message, right? The American dream is making sure your kids have a better life, meaning education, democracy, freedom, the ability to basically practice and do what you want. And that's what my parents gave me, and that's what I mean when I speak about the American dream in respects to my parents.
My parents, I don't even know if they understand what American dreams are, what an American dream is supposed to be, because they're in Afghanistan still, and they live there and they work there. And my American parents now, they never once mentioned to me American dream, but I have 4 other older siblings, and they raised all of them to be, the values they instill on them to be a good person, get education, get a job, be independent, and trying to make a difference. But being here and learning, and I think that's what American dream for me then slowly, how it translated to. And realistically, when I was in Afghanistan, American dream was living in New York City. And now I do live in New York City, and some dreams shouldn't come true because New York City it's busy, overwhelming, the subway is smelly, but expensive, but I like it. But that dream did come true.
Thanks for your questions. We are going to now wrap up in the next segment, which is essentially another montage of our compilation, and then we will also then go into an introductory to StoryCorps, the archiving process, and then remarks from the American Folklife Center.
I was born in Venezuela, and my parents are Lebanese. They immigrated to Venezuela when they were very young, and so I have that mix of cultures, and to me it was natural to be able to understand the different cultures, the Latin American culture, the Lebanese culture, the other Arabic cultures that we have in Venezuela. And then moving to the United States, I feel that I gain an additional culture as well. So I identify with people. That's what I think it made it easier for me. So I don't identify necessarily just with the culture as a whole. I see it as a bit pieces, elements, within a culture. And there are things that I like, things that I don't like. I adapt it as my own. My identity is really encompassing. I always rejected identifying with just one culture. Definitely Venezuela is where my heart is. That's where I was born, that's where my family is, that's what I know. But I've been living here in the United States and in Michigan for almost 21 years. So I've been here for so long, and I do feel American as well, and Michigan is my home as well. But it's easy for me, again, to go back to Venezuela. Go back to Lebanon is still my home as well. So I just would like a time, I guess, in which I'm not challenged to identify or to show solidarity, to a specific group. I don't want to identify as Lebanese, or I don't want to be identified as only Muslim. I don't want to be identified only as a Latino American. I want to be identified as a mix of all of this, because I feel that I understand all of them. Then why I'm going to be cornered into just one so people accept me? I think that people should accept me by my different identities. That's what makes me who I am, and I don't need to accommodate anyone.
My story begins just outside Chicago, Illinois. My mom and dad, they are immigrants from India. My father comes from a very small, dusty village outside of, about 9 or 10 hours outside of Mumbai called Bailungal. And he left that place when he was 16. And my mother grew up in Hyderabad. Well, she was born in Hyderabad, but grew up in Bombay. Very much comes from Hyderabadi culture. And that's kind of what's, interesting about, people think Indians and Pakistanis were, kind of one big thing, but really it's a subcontinent. So every state, every culture has its own flavor. And I grew up with both of those, the South Indian culture as well as the Hyderabadi, more Mughlai, North Indian culture in my household, which is really cool. I started out in college studying opera because it became very apparent later on in high school that I had a voice that was well suited for opera. So I rigorously studied the art of singing and the art of, classical music forms, whether that be the rudiments of music theory, oral skills, just the grounding that is good to have if one is to pursue a career in music. Growing up around Indo-Pakistani music as well as Black music. My mom and dad, really liked listening to Motown. They liked listening to James Brown. They liked listening to Stevie Wonder, among other things. And my dad had a profound appreciation for Black culture and the Black narrative here in America. I remember when we were growing up on Martin Luther King Day, it wasn't just like a holiday where, we just ran outside and played like the other kids. My dad had this rule that we'd have to come home for dinner because there would always be something on TV about Dr. King, and he made us watch it. And around dinner time, we would have a discussion. And every year, my mom and dad would say, you have to be grateful to Dr. King and what he did, because if it were not for him, we would not have been able to come to this country.
I'm originally from Somaliland. It's a breakaway region in the northwest side of Somalia. And we were born and raised in Abu Dhabi, then came here and moved to Chicago permanently in 2002. So when I came here, I was 11 years old. It was very hard coming into this country. Culturally, it was very different being a Muslim, especially after the unfortunate Twin Towers attack in New York. I was looked at differently. I wasn't exactly sure whether I should be a practicing Muslim or just fit in with the other kids. So it was just very hard to assimilate. I was just lost. There was this situation where I was in class and my teacher asked me where I was from. And I told her I was born and raised in Abu Dhabi. And then she was like, oh, so you were born in a desert. And, the kids were laughing, and I just felt like, should I hide where I'm from? Like, everyone's kind of laughing at me because everyone actually thought Abu Dhabi was a desert, but it's a country, and there are inhabitants of people. So I kind of started talking like my peers. I guess I was sort of trying to be American, but in reality, I lost my Muslim identity.
I was born in Baghdad, Iraq, and it was very much a civilized nation that I think a lot of people, don't know all of its history, but it was very well established and very well off up until recent events. We left at the time, I think I was probably about 4, and I just remember not really knowing what was going on or what was happening, but that there was something definitely off or something definitely wrong because I saw, how upset my parents were. And I vaguely remember being at a bus stop with them and my grandparents. And we were supposed to be just taking I'm doing air quotes, like a vacation, because we weren't supposed to be leaving Iraq. And even with just having immigrant parents, like the stories that they share, I think really paint a picture of, just how difficult they had it over there and how hard they worked. My parents are incredibly conservative. They controlled a lot of things that I did. And with our cultural background, it's already hard enough for parents to hear that, their son is gay, let alone, they come from being Iraqi and their son is gay, which culturally that's like, you get stoned for that. I've been asked by people usually like, how is it being an Iraqi in the military? Aren't you like fighting your people? Isn't that weird? And honestly, I don't think I've ever let that question like really simmer with me, because I don't know what I would have done. You know what I mean? If I really sat there and entertained that question, because on one hand, yes, I am Iraqi culturally. I come from Iraq and they're, my people, but I'm American as well. So it's this super strange and weird gray area, because it's like, well, this is my country too. I've been here since I was 5, and I value my freedom and I will fight for it, and I enjoy my freedom.
My name is Khadijatu Doumbia. I go by the name Kadi. I am from Mali. I was born and raised over there all the way to the age of 18. I left my country when I was 18 years old, traveled to Europe, and fast forward, came to the United States about 24 years ago. I live in Chicago right now. I grew up in a very big family, in a polygamous family. I had 4 moms in the family. My father had 4 wives, and that's where I was raised. Tough for me, and from what I understand, like in my country, FGM, which is female genital mutilation, is not illegal in my country. It's still going on. My hope is that, of course, we have to have education around this subject, and we have to have an open conversation about the subject, because nobody talks about FGM. Nobody does. If we can find a way to educate people about not only the physical pain, because I don't remember my physical pain, the psychological pain that stays with you forever, ever, until you die.
I'm going to reintroduce the panelists back up. We do have about 10 minutes for more of an interactive Q&A in regards to the story montage that we just listened to, and any other things that we may have overlooked throughout the first segment. So, yes.
There's a focus here on the immigrant community, and as an immigrant myself, I don't want to diminish that. But nonetheless, more than a quarter of the Muslims in America are the children of converts, overwhelmingly African Americans. Have you included them in the storytelling? And if so, would you? And if not, why didn't you have a representative of that somewhere in the montages or on the panel?
We have, you just can't see somebody's image when they're explaining their story. We have collected and archived stories from the Black Muslim community, from the African Muslim community, various diasporas as well, 1st generation to 4th generation. It's very difficult in such a short amount of time, and also with just audio, to actually show you the vast majority of the collection and the rich compilation of stories that we have collected. So I do urge everybody to go on the website. It's malanational.org, and look through the stories, and hopefully you can also see the diverse voices that we have showcased through the stories that are spread throughout the room with people's photographs and just an excerpt of their narrative. So I hope that answers your question.
Hi. So thank you for your presentation. This is very good. And as a child of enjoying StoryCorps and the American folk life. This is timely. So I was just curious, in your work, are you capturing the diverse ideological perspectives within the Islamic tradition as well? I certainly appreciate my colleague over there's comments. I'm a fourth generation African American Muslim. My great-grandparents converted to Islam back in the 30s through jazz musicians and largely through Sufism. So I appreciate that comment too as well. But largely, I was just curious in terms of just diversity of perspectives, liberal, secular, Shia,
Absolutely.
Sufi, etc.
Liberal, secular, Shia, Sunni, Orthodox, atheist Muslims even. We have spotlighted stories from people of all different backgrounds. Our platform is open, and that's why we encourage you to go on the site. And I wish there was a way where we actually could showcase all 350 plus stories, in addition to not just ideological or theological or whatever it may be. That, you know, there's so many different divides within the Muslim community itself that our hope was through storytelling, we're able to bring and connect people together from such a broad and diverse community that represents what a Muslim American is. And I think just even listening to these stories and having these panelists up here and listening to just different perspectives shows you that we have actually encompassed one of the broadest range collections of narratives and stories and experiences, and we hope to continue to do more. You know, our goal is to have thousands of stories, people from first generation to fourth generation. And we've done recordings with StoryCorps in partnership with the Arab American National Museum. We've done it with the Minneapolis community. We do it in Chicago. We do it in New York. We've done it with the university students, exchange students from the MENA region. So, like I said, it's a very broad range of just people's individual experiences. And we never tell anybody what to write or what to submit or what to talk about. They're free to do that. It's your story. You have autonomy over it, and you can share what you want.
I feel a bit odd since it's kind of been raised twice now, but I also had this reflection that he raised that, you know, while there's considerable, you know, geographic and ethnic diversity that's really beautiful and shines through these stories, it does seem like there's a consistent story of immigration or having parents in the context of immigration. And so I was wondering if you were doing any outreach specifically to communities that, you know, whose story of immigration, forced or otherwise, is from several generations ago.
Those are amazing stories. We've had a few that are like fourth generation stories, and even stories that are not about immigration. It's just about their own personal experience. Again, we would love to reach out to a broader range of people to, you know, in different communities within the Muslim American communities to, you know, come out and reach out to us and share your story. We're really, really, really trying to keep pushing the power of narratives, especially diverse ones from people of all different backgrounds. So we're very open to it. Again, you know, reach out to us through the website. We're very active on social media as well, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And there's several ways you can submit your story or even sign up to be recording your story with StoryCorps, in which StoryCorps will actually talk about that a little bit in a little bit more depth coming up. So there are very, very different ways where you can still get involved and share your narrative with Mala or your story in general. I hope that answered the question. We have another one there.
Okay. Again, I have a question from Ahmed and Supna in regard of particularly when the hate crime against Muslims increased because of involvement of some distant individuals into the terrorist attacks, where you feel that the Muslim community placed themselves. And that is one question. And the second question is, do you think that the Muslim from Middle East and Muslim from South Asia, their pattern of association with America and with the American dream has been different?
We have about a couple of minutes to answer this, and there's a couple more questions, so.
I'm not sure if I understood the question exactly, but with regard to hate crimes and their effect on the Muslim-American community, I definitely feel that there's a greater sense of trepidation among communities about what's going on and what the appropriate response should be, especially considering we're three examples of individuals and families that have tried to, I think, in our own ways, just to, work and mind our own business like everybody else does, in their respective communities across the nation. I think it's, with respect to the individuals perpetrating the crime, I think that's where your question was going. I think that's where communication is needed, and barriers related more to ignorance than necessarily racism even need to be responded to. I think that, and this is my personal opinion, not Mala's, but a hyper-partisan political environment doesn't help. We need to talk to each other more. We need to have projects like Mala's narrative project be expanded into more communities. And for the questions regarding to the demographics that haven't been included yet, that's a factor of funding. Zainab's organization, which I don't fund myself or get a salary from, they work really hard to try to raise the money they can to get people taped. It's not, these kind of projects aren't easy. They're not making anybody money. So nonprofits like Zainab's or any other community-oriented project needs public support. And it'll reach the demographics where you're seeing the gaps if that support happens. And the second part of your question was about
South Asia, they affiliate themselves differently from the American dream, or they have the same thing?
I think it varies. I think it varies. I mean, I think when audience member, raised concern with that feeling of, victimization, I think it's how these issues are spoken about. I personally feel more strongly that every immigrant community that has come into the United States, regardless of era, has faced its unique challenges, and Muslims are going to face their challenges given the political backdrop we find ourselves in. 100 years from now, I don't know what other community is going to face integration issues, but it's a part of growing. Like, to me, what America is, what America means, that identity, it's live and organic, and it changes, and it's in flux, and it's what you contribute, what you take back, and it goes back to communication and respect. Even especially where you see the differences, that's where the communication needs to happen 10 times more. And we can't look at each other's caricatures, which I think is the issue on all sides, and that's my politics, not Zainab's.
I think overall, some of these questions are great because it goes into a much larger picture, and there's so many overlapping issues, obviously, social issues that kind of go into this. But again, our goal is to scale our project and showcasing narratives, showcasing the diverse individual experiences, and no two people's experiences are ever going to be the same. We did have a question here.
This is a much narrower question. A number of years ago, I read that the mosque that has been in continuous existence in the United States the longest is located in Iowa. Do you know if that's true, or do you not know whether it's true or not, or do you know definitely that it isn't true that there's some other mosque which is has the longest continuous existence?
I'm not sure. If anybody else has an answer? Okay.
Yeah. Anybody got Google?
I do know that when we were in Dearborn, Michigan, recording stories with the Arab American National Museum and StoryCorps, that's actually one of the oldest populations of Muslim Americans, Arab Americans. Arab Americans also consist of Christian Americans as well. But that's actually one of the, primary immigrant groups that really was the building block of like a great American city. Now, in regards to the mosque and the development and the communities, I'm sure it comes with time as communities settle in. So, not sure about the Iowa one, but thank you for verifying. Sure.
It's not just the mosque in Iowa. Muslims are part of American folk culture, though people don't recognize it. There's a play called Oklahoma in which one of the characters is a peddler named Ali Hakim. And he's there because there were so many immigrant Muslim peddlers in the Midwest. And he's, reflective of that. Benjamin Franklin, when he did his census of Philadelphia, because he was concerned that he thought Pennsylvania was being taken over by Germans, found a Muslim community, significant Muslim population in Philadelphia. That was in 1742, so.
Interesting.
I have a question for you. Have you considered, I guess obviously it would be a much larger project, but hearing the voices and hearing the stories definitely brings it to life. But hearing the panelists and seeing them and telling their stories really puts it all together. Would you, I guess, look at making like a video form of these stories with the individuals narrating their story as more like a documentary or some larger format?
We have actually discussed that quite a bit. Again, a lot of it is, limited time, limited budget, limited manpower. Mala is all run by volunteers and board members. We're lucky to have, a good solid base of like grassroots donors. One of the things that we did look into was our StoryCorps segments are so beautifully edited and they're just so compelling, and it would be amazing to have them animated even. That was something that we also had discussed. So there are quite a lot of things in the pipeline that we would like to do. I think panels like this really bring forth the voices. So Mala does do very interactive events in Chicago and in New York, obviously where we have our largest network of volunteers and people who are really committed to making the event happen. And we would love to continue doing a lot more nationwide programs and events similar to this. We are having something similar to this in Chicago with the Chicago Cultural Alliance in October. And hopefully we can continue scaling this project. So that's why we're very grateful for everybody that is here and for StoryCorps for giving us the opportunity to bring these stories more mainstream, as well as the American Folklife Center for making, putting this kind of an event on the map in regards to the significance of such stories, and also the Library of Congress where the stories are actually archived and housed for generations to come. So I hope that answers your question. My next presenter, and first of all, I want to thank the panelists for their incredible, input, feedback, and also to share your story on a stage. It's not easy, so please let's have a warm round of applause for them. Our next speaker is Tamara, and she is from StoryCorps. And these are all StoryCorps segments that you were able to listen to today that were recorded through a community partnership with Mala and StoryCorps. And they've done incredible work in archiving stories, hundreds of thousands of stories from Americans from all walks of life. I'm very, very honored to introduce Tamara on StoryCorps tonight.
Hello, hello. I'm very pleased to be here today. Again, my name is Tamara Thompson, and I'm the archive manager at StoryCorps. Okay. Are we okay with the, everyone can hear me all right? Okay. Excuse me. Yes, again, I'm very pleased to be here to talk a little bit more about the partnership that StoryCorps has with Mala, and also the contributions Mala has made to the StoryCorps archive. Now, before we get started with that, I'd like to talk a little bit about StoryCorps for those of you who are unfamiliar with us. So StoryCorps is an independent nonprofit organization that was founded in 2003 by radio documentarian Dave Isay. Now, our mission is relatively simple. It is to record, preserve, and share humanity's stories. And in pursuit of this mission, we hope to really build a sense of compassion and empathy throughout humanity as well. So this is how it works. We have recording locations in San Francisco, Atlanta, and Chicago. We also have a mobile booth that travels around to different cities each month recording stories. And we have what's called a national team in New York, which is based out of New York, but they travel all over the country recording stories as well. And so you might come into one of our booths with a friend, a family member, someone you know, or someone you'd like to get to know a little bit more. And you'd have a 40-minute conversation with that person. It would be recorded by one of our trained facilitators who would be taking notes during the process. And afterwards, of course, you would receive a copy of the interview. And with the participants' permission, we would also add that interview to the StoryCorps archive. Now, every interview that is part of the StoryCorps archive is actually housed right here at the Library of Congress at the American Folklife Center. So those of you who are interested in hearing some of these stories from the Mala collection and other collections that we have in the StoryCorps archive, you can make a reservation at the American Folklife Center and go and listen to some of those stories. We are hoping to put a large portion of the archive online in the next year or so stay tuned for more details on that. So at this point, we've collected over 70,000 interviews. Now, you cannot collect 70,000 interviews in a silo. We rely on partnerships like Mala to reach participants to create the archive that we have today. And we would be unable to pursue our mission without the partners that we work with like Mala. There would be very little recording, preserving, or sharing if we didn't have any interviews. So we see the stories in our archive as contributions from participants and organizations as well. So I do want to make sure that everyone knows how grateful StoryCorps is to be working with Mala, and very, very grateful to have been connected with Mala. This happened back in 2014. So in 2014, our Chicago story booth, led by Shirley Alfaro, was very interested in making sure that we reached out to Muslim communities. And so they were attempting to find partnerships within these communities, and they were having some difficulty. So they mentioned this to another partner organization of ours. We have a partnership with we have a radio station partnership with WBEZ. And a person from WBEZ connected Shirley and her Chicago team to Zainab and Mala, and thus the partnership was forged. In 2015, actually December the 6th, 2015 was the very first interview recorded in partnership between StoryCorps and Mala. And since then, there have been 88 interviews recorded with over 90 participants and more to be recorded. And so this has been one of the most successful partnerships to come out of the Chicago booth. And it's been a really incredible ride. And so I again, thank the Chicago booth and the folks at Mala for starting this partnership. Now, for those of you who've not really perused the collection, if you haven't had an opportunity to do so, I'd like to give a brief snapshot of the types of stories that are there and the individuals who are part of this archive, part of this Journeys collection. Now, some of the themes that you'll hear are about home, acceptance, identity, culture, music, art, resilience. Some of these are traumatic stories. Some of these stories are about painful events, but they're also about love and laughter and hope. The people who are presenting their stories are artists, visionaries, thinkers, writers, creators, content producers, educators, activists, friends and family members, colleagues, mentors, and mentees. There are so many different types of stories that are being told and so many types of participants who are part of this project. In addition, there are dozens of countries represented. Zainab read a few early on, and so I'll just list a couple. But there's Tunisia, Libya, Saudi Arabia, India, London, Nigeria, Egypt, Lebanon, and the list goes on. It's a really fantastic project that we are very grateful to be a part of. And again, emphasizing how important partnerships are in order to get the word out about StoryCorps, to have people understand that their stories are important. And whether you record your story with StoryCorps or another organization or on your own, it's important to capture these stories. it's important to make sure your voice is heard and the stories of your community, whatever type of community that may be, are archived and saved in perpetuity. So with that, I would just like to again encourage you all to find out more information about StoryCorps and our many partnerships by visiting our website. If you're interested in starting a partnership with StoryCorps, there is information available on our website. If you're interested in hearing more about Mala, they have a fantastic website, so you should definitely check that out. Again, you can also make a reservation here at the Library of Congress at the American Folklife Center and listen to interviews here in the Library of Congress, the beauty and splendor of the Library of Congress. Again, remember to share your stories, record your stories. And coming up next, we're going to have Julia Kim, who is one of the individuals responsible for processing the StoryCorps archive and ingesting the materials that we send to her. So she's got some very interesting things to talk about, one of which is another way that you can record your stories by using the StoryCorps app. So thank you very much, and take care.
Hi, I'm Julia Kim. I have the privilege of actually working with these interviews and stories when they come here to the library. I'm just going to spend 10 minutes sort of getting more granular and talking about the app that's available on smartphones to use. So if you are interested in contributing to StoryCorps and to the archive, you can go home and do that right away. But I'm going to spend most of my time specifically talking about keywords. And I think this actually, it loops back to a lot of the themes that we've been talking about earlier today. So keywords have a very maybe obvious function in that they make it easier for us to get a sense on what are these discrete files that have sort of, they can have gibberish names. So you can see at the top, there's a lot of keywords. Maybe not all of you can see those, but 100 years, Clayton family, Libby High School. So there are dates, locations, there are even like full names. And then on the bottom, and this just happened to be on the screen, it's great convo. Great convo might be an apt descriptor, but it doesn't help us a lot of times down the line when we're trying to understand what is the value of this story, what is going on here, what are the themes that we're talking about. So on a very practical level, as we've been talking about today, you can come on over and take a look at these stories. And this collection is obviously extremely popular for patrons, students, researchers who are interested in this huge corpus of interviews that obviously go across broad sections of not just America, but all around the world. So we often get questions like, I want to listen to interviews about disabilities, or I'm interested in Native and Indigenous oral histories. So this loops back to keywords. Great convo isn't going to help, but if you have disabilities, for example, in the first one, as a keyword, we can pull that up for you, for your family members, for whoever is interested, really. And really, the more keywords you add, the more that we can search. So if someone comes in and asks for a topic, for example, Indigenous in that last one, we might pull up everything related to Indigenous, but we'd have to think, what are other labels and words around that? So Native, First Nation, Native American. So this gets back to categories and labels. And this is just the way that we have to work in terms of trying to figure out what are these stories about, who are the people talking in them, and what is the value. So people obviously categorize things differently. So this is where you and your role as sort of like the first archivist doing the interviews come in terms of interpreting what your role is, or what your identity is maybe, or what are the themes here, what is the value here, right? Ultimately, what is the value in this story and interview? And that's really the main point of this talk. It's that you can go home and you can decide, is it appropriate to do First Nation, or is it appropriate to do Indigenous? Is it appropriate to do Muslim? Is it appropriate to do Muslim-American? But what I'm talking about very broadly is then trying to address all these questions like who, what, where, and then in these keywords. So if you actually look in the app, it'll give you some examples of how to answer these things. So they can be, we would like ideally for them to be both very broad, for example, family, mother, sister, in terms of relationships that are being talked about, but also full names. So if you come in and say, my mother, a young Kim, wants to hear her interview, I can search that. It has to actually be put in. So there's sort of a balance that we're trying to hit in terms of broader themes, but also a lot of specificity. And here's a great example actually from the StoryCorps.me website, which has a lot of great resources that sort of walk you through what are best and ideal practices. So you're not completely limited to keywords, but also the interview title can be very descriptive. So here it's Flatbush Community Garden Center, Jane and John on the transformative power of urban gardening, and then summary and descriptions. So in this example, I found the summary and description really important because it talks about the relationship actually between the interview and interviewee, as they are both the co-founders of this garden that's being talked about. This is actually a look at the public API for the StoryCorps.me. So once you submit your, press the submit button on the phone, it's actually immediately available on the API publicly, which I find really amazing. So you can find, for example, in this is an example from the last couple of days from the great Ramadan Listen, which is another big initiative by StoryCorps.me. And so you can see that they're very specific keywords. But in this one, really, they're just really Muslim and Islam-related keywords, and they're actually the only keywords, really. So they're very sparse in that way. So you can see another example here of how these keywords look on the public API if you were to submit them. So Ramadan, and then the locations, Oregon, United States, and dates, and so forth. I thought it'd be really interesting because of the discussion about diversity and cross-sections to look at some Mala StoryCorps keywords that were put in. So I found it really interesting that in a broad number of them, actually, it seemed like maybe Islam and Muslim were not explicitly put in, and yet maybe there are themes around it, or maybe it was part of this collection in some way. And so I think it comes back to over here. Here's another really good one where the different keywords included, for example, advice, aging, art, college, divorce, ethnic identity, cultural expectations, independence, leadership, volunteerism. And these were definitely very broad, applicable themes on this interview. But maybe if I had been looking for this and it hadn't been labeled as part of Mala, I would not have found this collection. So if somebody came in and said, I want, this interview about Muslims, this interview, for example, would have not come up in the search. But I also think maybe it wasn't relevant. Going back to some of the excerpts that we heard earlier, maybe this person didn't feel comfortable self-identifying strictly as Muslim, or maybe this person was atheist, but had some sort of cultural relationship or of some kind. So I think it's interesting to think about how these labels are very important, and they have a very, very practical usage. So we have people coming in all the time asking about these StoryCorps interviews, but also that there's a high-level interpretation when you go home and use your phone and use the app, and that you can self-identify if you want to. You can explicitly say, I'm going to identify as Korean American, or I choose not to because I feel like there's a sort of flattening effect with the keywords, or I just don't feel comfortable with that. So that's sort of my 10 minutes, but I know you must think, wow, this is chaotic. How do you manage and classify when you have 80,000 interviews? I'm just going to point out that there's a whole system in place where we, at the library, and archivists and librarians here do this professionally, and there are categories and ways to do this. So this is a snapshot of our authority lists, specifically around Muslim. So there are whole areas of study here, but the point of the app in some ways, and one of the great things about the app, is that it embraces your own interpretation, and that when you go home and contribute to this, you can do whatever you want in terms of identifying yourself or not. So I would encourage you to use the app and come and use our collections, and that's sort of keywords in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you to Julia, and thank you to everyone who's spoken today. It's been an amazing couple of hours of stories and talking about stories and talking about what they mean to us. So we want to thank everyone from Mala who's here and everyone from StoryCorps. And my name is Steve Winnick, and I work for the American Folklife Center. So I'm from that third organization you've been hearing about quite a bit. And I'm here to talk to you about a sort of more general approach to collecting cultural documentation. So I think to begin, we can say that the genius of StoryCorps is that the StoryCorps principle was to facilitate these kinds of interviews, right? Make them really easy for people to do. And in so doing, they sort of made a lot of those background decisions that you have to make if you're going to do cultural documentation. They made those decisions for you and put them in place so that you could just go in and do interviews. And the result of this is this amazing collection of recorded interviews, and what comes out of that are these wonderful edited stories that you hear on the radio, or that you can see in animations on YouTube. They've done some really great things with them as well. The only thing about this approach that can be seen as a drawback is that, we got a question, for example, are you going to make a film documentary? And you can't do that with the documentation that StoryCorps has produced exclusively. You would have to go in and make other documentation, including footage, in order to do that. And so taking a step backwards is what I'm going to do now and talk about doing documentation, but you have to decide what the model is before you start that process. And I'm going to be talking, sort of jumping off from a book that the American Folklife Center has just put out about a year ago. It's called Folklife and Fieldwork. And there are copies of this book on the table outside. Everyone could have taken one on the way in, but you can now take one on the way out if you didn't take one on the way in. And this describes that process of doing cultural documentation from the sort of beginning to the end, the soup to nuts approach. So I'm going to start. So this is really about thinking about folklife fieldwork in a digital world. So it begins with this question of what is folklife? And here's where I'm nervous you won't be able to read the slide, but it won't matter because I'll read it for you as well. So one of the great things about being at the American Folklife Center, our director at the beginning, Betsy Peterson, explained that we were placed here at the Library of Congress in order to document the diversity of American folklife. And that really is our legislation, and it's an inspiring piece of legislation because it begins by saying how important diversity is to American life, and that we should be documenting it and keeping, preserving that documentation in the Library of Congress. And so that's a great part of the legislation, but another part is that it actually defines folklife so that it can direct us as to what it is that we're supposed to document. And so this definition of folklife actually comes from the public law that established the American Folklife Center. So this is the wisdom of the US Congress, and I'm not just saying that because I have to. So this is how they define folklife. The traditional, expressive, shared culture of various groups in the United States, familial, ethnic, occupational, religious, and regional. It says expressive culture includes a wide range of creative and symbolic forms, such as custom, belief, technical skill, language, literature, art, architecture, music, play, dance, drama, ritual, pageantry, and handicraft. And then it explains that these expressions are mainly learned orally, by imitation or in performance, and are generally maintained or perpetuated without benefit or formal instruction or institutional direction. So essentially, it's saying that, that folklife is sort of small-scale traditional culture that is maintained in communities of all kinds. And the American Folklife Center exists to document and preserve such culture. So now the question is, what is this word, fieldwork, which is in the title? And I put ethnographic in parentheses because other disciplines use fieldwork too, like geologists consider going out and collecting rocks to be a form of fieldwork, and that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about cultural documentation. So what fieldwork really is the first-hand observation and documentation of culture, and this results in various forms of documentation, and you see a list of the kinds of things that you might end up with if you did ethnographic fieldwork. And many of these forms now are going to come in the form of digital files, right? Even though they're written notes, they're actually going to be Word documents as opposed to a notebook in a lot of cases. So you end up with a lot of digital files, and you also end up probably with some analog materials, drawings, objects. And I put forms in there because it's important to get people's permission, which we'll talk about in a minute. And so forms come with pretty much any collection of this type. And so here's how you would get started in such a process. The first thing that you have to do is think about what your goals and outcomes are, right? So one kind of documentation or of fieldwork is just to understand the community for yourself. So you're a scholar, right, and you want to know more about this community, so you go in to make that understanding for yourself. But another kind is when you're helping the community in some way, that is, they need to get a grant, for example, and they need documentation of certain of the things that they do in order to get that grant. So that's another possible model of folklife fieldwork, is for helping the community. And the two, of course, are not only not mutually exclusive, but they work together very well. So sometimes you start out just learning about the culture, but then people within the culture realize that there's some way that you can help them with this documentation. That happens to folklorists all the time, and we roll with that. We try to help the communities as much as we can. And finally, a third thing that you need to think about in terms of goals and outcomes is specific end products. Are you, for example, thinking about writing a book, or are you going to make a documentary, as someone mentioned in the room? All of these things, all of these three decisions: are you understanding the community, how are you helping the community, and what specific end product do you want to create, will affect the kinds of documentation that you produce, right? So if you know that you want to make a film, then you have to start thinking about that kind of documentation, about making video footage, for example. And then you decide what to document. And I love the fact that both Julia and I have the who, what, where slide, right? But this is very important. Because if you start with something that's too broad, you will never finish your project or even get your project started. So really, those three are the three main questions that you usually ask. Who, meaning which community are you documenting? What, meaning what facet of this huge thing called folklife do you want to study? And thirdly, where are you going to do it? So, I mean, just as an example, if you wanted to study traditional Pakistani weddings, right? You could say, well, I'll study them all over the world, but that would not be a realistic project. So you want to have, each one of these items, you want to have an idea for what the value of that is. So I'm going to do it in New York City, for example, and that will make that project a lot easier to complete. And then you want to think in advance about archiving, sustainability, and access, right? So you are going to create files, these digital files. In 20 years, is anyone going to be able to use the files that you've created? That's a problem for all of us, and it's a problem that is best solved by consulting with professionals, because these things change all the time, and folks within archives and libraries are the people who really know the answers to these questions, or at least know the trajectories that we're on, and can give you the best answers that we know today. And so really what this is saying is, if you want your collection to be accessible in the future, and you want the files to be sustainable so that even you can use them in the future, you probably want to talk to someone at some point in your process, and the earlier the better, right? So if you talk to an archivist before you even start, that's probably better than creating the documentation and then talking to them later. And what this means is, when you're going to do a project, you sort of think about in advance, what kind of archive do I think this might belong in find that kind of archive and talk to someone there. And even if they aren't sure they're interested in the collection until they see it, which is quite often the case, they'd be willing often to talk to you about what standards they would accept and why they would accept those standards and what your next best option is and all kinds of questions like that. So we really encourage you to talk to an archive in advance of doing a project. There are ethics considerations involved in any fieldwork project. Mainly, the main issue is to be honest and transparent about everything. So never deceive people, never collect information on false pretenses. If you don't know what you're going to do with the documentation, that's okay. But if you do know, if you know you're making a film, then you should tell them that that's what you're doing. There's really not a good reason usually to conceal what you're doing from the people that you're interviewing. And the second part of this is to make sure that you get permission, express permission to use people's materials, that is their image, their voice. And usually we do this through the use of release forms, which I'll talk about a little bit in a few minutes. After you've done all that, right, after you know what kind of project you're doing, where you're doing it, what kind of archive you might want to turn this material into, what kind of standards that archive would need, all of those questions, then you can decide on the equipment needs for recording this particular project. After you do that, you do some preliminary research. That is to say, you're studying Pakistani weddings in New York. Well, you go online and see what you can find out about that. You go to the library and you see if there are books about it, articles about it that can help you in your planning of the initial kinds of field work. And then you start making community connections. Now, in many cases, people who are starting this kind of project are starting it because they already have community connections. They know someone in the community. They've been interested in it for a long time. But if you don't, you look for cultural centers, you look for civic organizations, those kinds of places that are used to being brokers between the culture and other people who are from outside. And you go and talk to them and see who might be interested in talking to you, what use this project might have within the community, and how you can help and fit into the community's needs. And after you do that, you can then decide on the real specifics of what you want to document. So, you know, I've got to now come up with a way to document the dress, the music, and the food that are going to be part of 3 Pakistani weddings in New York. This is just a project that I've made up for the purposes of this talk, but that's an example of the kinds of things that you then come up with when you narrow it down to this level of the specifics. And you then start thinking about this process that in anthropology or folklore we call participant observation. Okay, so how is it that you're going to be part of these events and not be in the way? And there are 2 ways to do that, usually that ethnographers use a lot. One is to become a learner of some kind. So if you're interested in a musical tradition, for example, you apprentice yourself to a player and you learn to play the instrument and you document it through that process of learning. And the other is to become a helper of some kind. So if you're not going to be the chef at the wedding, you can still help sweep the floor and do other unglamorous but very useful tasks that will put you in the place that you want to be in order to document it and make you useful to the community so that they're happy you're there and they're happy that you're documenting their event as well. And then once you've got yourself, you know, you've got yourself placed, that's when you figure out who the people are that you're going to interview, and you're going to set up your first interviews. And then, of course, before you actually go in the field, you have to learn to use that equipment that you selected through that other process, which just means you have a little practice, you know, have some practice sessions and go through that. And I mentioned release forms. You want to design release forms or obtain them from somewhere. This book has release forms in it, so that's a very helpful thing that you can just pull out the versions that are in here. And those release forms are, again, to give you permission to use what you collect. So if I have done an interview with someone on video and I want to put it in a film, it's helpful from the beginning to have had that person's consent, because otherwise you might go back to them later and they say, well, you know, I was happy to talk to you, but I don't want it in the film. And then, you know, that amount of footage is not as helpful to you as it would have been. So it's always good to know these things in advance And this is why you have your release forms at the outset. And then you can go ahead and schedule your interviews. You create your questions, so you figure out what it is you want to ask and how you're going to get the information that you need, and you go ahead and you conduct your first interview. So now my point in going through all of those steps was to show you that with StoryCorps, the wonderful thing is you walk into the booth and you conduct your first interview. You don't have to go through those steps. But if you're doing a different kind of documentary project, you do, and it's a really good idea to have all of this stuff thought out in advance. And this is what the process of Folklife Fieldwork often is like. So that's just the beginning. So then you've just gotten to your first interview, and then of course from there, you just take it from there, right? Those people will introduce you to other people. You know what the events are. You've thought about what the events are that you have to document and how you have to do that. So you have a plan for the process of this project. So as you see, there are a lot of steps involved in planning it that you don't have to do with StoryCorps, but if you're starting from scratch, you might have to do all of these things. One thing to keep in mind, I know that this can sound daunting, and so the last thing to keep in mind is have fun on your project. Don't let it bog you down. And a lot of the time, you'll find that you get interested in doing a project like this because you already have relationships in the community, and sometimes the community has already started the process of documentation, and you're sort of contributing to something that's already ongoing. And if that's the case, although you can't make this plan from the very beginning the way I just outlined, you can take a look at what's already there, see how well it fits into these parameters, and do anything retroactively that you can to get this ready for archiving later. And if you, there are other tips. I can't go through the whole book, but you can, because the book is free and it's right outside on the table. So there are other tips for doing a whole ethnographic project and for making those materials that you create sustainable and accessible in the future in an archive. And we really hope that you'll do that and you'll think about all the great ways that you can go out there and document culture. So once again, I want to thank all our friends at Mala and StoryCorps, and on behalf of the American Folklife Center, just say thank you for coming.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.